If that was a serious mistake, it's an unpardonable mistake. In 2009, looking back at that desperately dangerous and fearful period of world history, to underestimate the threat of fascism, and to cast the question narrowly in terms of the class relations and the class struggle within individual countries. And to say that, well, okay, so Germany's turned fascist, Italy's turned fascist, but in France, or Belgium, or other countries, well, we'll just fight the good fight for workers' power. But we should all be reflective about that question. Was it a just war, the struggle against fascism? Of course it was a just war. And it was the principal contradiction in the world. Just like today, there are, primary and secondary and tertiary contradictions. And they don't always conveniently line up. That's okay, well, fight this battle, but this also is going to reflect itself in advancing the interests at all levels, local, provincial, national, international. There are contradictions, and there are difficult times, not in theory, not in abstract, but in real political life, when you have to look at that question and say, what is the primary contradiction? To fail to do that, and to fail to acknowledge, let alone act upon, divisions within the ruling class, nationally and internationally. To reduce everything to simple class against class. And not to take advantage of divisions, no matter how temporary, no matter how sliver thin, in fact. Those divisions in the camp of the enemy. To isolate the most reactionary, the most dangerous section of the ruling class. Even if that means alliances, even if that means formal or usually informal. And even some concessions in order to deepen a split within the enemy camp. And to weaken and isolate as much as possible the most dangerous, the most reactionary section of capital, which was represented by German imperialism, by fascism in Europe and in Asia. To fail to do that, while patting oneself on the back, how pristine, how pure we are, that is the height of scholasticism. Thank you.
Well, I think this question of the international dynamic that Miguel raises is very true. But he's talking about here a dynamic among the states. I think that the idea that goes back to Marx and Engels, goes back to other revolutionaries, is the notion we're interested in the international solidarity, international working class solidarity. If you can build a revolutionary movement in France in the 1930s and build revolutionary power in France, if you can take power in Spain, will that have an impact back on Italy? Could you shake something loose in what's happening with Mussolini? His regime was not a Hitler regime. It did not have the same strength. Could you do something with that power in Greece? Could the power that you had in Spain and France do something to change the character of politics in England? Would English workers have been inspired by a revolution across the Channel? You know, that's the question. It's international dynamics, but which dynamics are we interested in here? I think World War II is absolutely a war, just like World War I. I can't understand. We have exactly the same sort of situation. In the Soviet Union, we've had a counter-revolution consolidating the power of a new group there, which is building its power on the death of at least 5 or 6 million peasants in the Ukraine, in that part of Russia. This is Stalin's Russia is built on the wiping out of entire peoples and a genocidal thing that's taking place in the Soviet Union. This is not a victory for socialism to defend the Soviet Union in this period. And in Western Europe, let's take the United States in World War II. The United States is going to use World War II to take over the oil fields that exist in the Middle East. It's going to use the United States, is going to move in to supplant England in Latin America. The United States is going to move into Japan, will bomb Japan. Those 2 atomic bombs dropped on Japan. I was born August 9th, 1945. I was born on the date of the second bomb. It's always in my mind. That's my birth date. when the United States dropped that bomb. The United States, the ally of the Soviet Union in the Great War against fascism and against genocide. The United States dropped that bomb. This was a war that redivided the planet between the great powers. You had throughout Europe many people after World War II, as after World War I, who were disgusted with capitalism. As in World War I, capitalism had brought crisis, it had brought warfare, it had brought the deaths of millions. And there were many people in Europe who wanted socialism after World War II. And what did they get? They got that famous meeting where Stalin and Churchill and Roosevelt sat around a table tearing up bits of papers with the names of nations and people on them and exchanging them, and you got agreements that between Stalin, that if you don't disturb my world in Eastern Europe, I'm not going to disturb your world in Western Europe. And we won't bring revolution after World War II to France and Spain, and you won't mess around in Eastern Europe, will you? And they were good to their bargain. When Hungary revolted against Stalin, the United States didn't mess with Hungary. And on this question of today, I was told during the Obama election by communists in the United States, I was told, this is such an important election. This is going to be a defeat for the fascism of Bush. We have to support Obama. This is going to open up great possibilities for the left. This will bring a new dynamism to the left. We have to support the African American community in electing this president. I think the truth of the matter is this president is a creature of finance capital. This president is a person who represents the big banks. This doesn't mean that there was a tremendous dynamism around the Obama campaign. In my neighborhood, I was surprised to see in quiet streets in Cincinnati where I live, people were out carrying signs and so on. And what happened to them? They flowed into Obama's organization. He built an organization. He sucked them up into his organization, and they are now people who have been looking to him for leadership. And even when he has continued the war in Iraq, he has continued the war in Afghanistan, he continues the secret war, not so secret war in Pakistan, he has saved the bankers. He has saved the auto companies at the expense of all the auto workers. He has ruined their union, their contracts, their salaries, their conditions. So I've heard this argument before. Well, we have to look for this sliver-thin difference. I'm not looking for the sliver-thin difference between capitalists. I'm looking to build a radical grassroots movement from below with working-class politics, with environmental politics, with feminist politics, with internationalist politics that respects ethnic diversity, that believes in peace, that believes in freedom, that believes in democracy. I'm not for fighting over the sliver. I'm for looking at the essence of the politics of the Popular Front, rejecting and say, our essence of our politics has to be independent politics, that workers make their own decisions. They don't join the Democrats. They don't become part of the NDP or the Liberal Party. That we have to build an independent working class movement that can influence these other parties. Thank you.
Now is your turn to voice your opinion. Go to nowpolling.ca, click on Federal Polls, and look for political ideologies. And remember, your participation is the essence of direct democracy.
People take